and is an important central destination in close proximity to a primary school and the secondary school, as well as larger areas of green infrastructure and the sports hub. The hub will contain a range of 3 to 4 story residential, commercial and community mixed use buildings and marks a clear transition in scale, density and activity from adjacent residential parcels. Chapter 8 of the code provides a number of high level plans to inform the layout of the hub. The plan on the right shows how development blocks are arranged to enclose the street and edges to Runway Park and provides a pedestrianised route between the Education Campus Approach Park in Key Phase 1, which is to the south of that image, to the Heritage Area in Key Phase 3, and frames views towards the avionics building, which is the yellow asterisk, the yellow star on that image. This chapter of the code also includes a number of design principles, setting out requirements for facades, building usage, architectural detailing, building hierarchies, entrances, and signage. Chapter 4 of the code sets out the strategy and approach to green infrastructure within Key Phase 3, including formal and informal open space, planting, biodiversity, and ecological corridors and future parks. The overarching strategy is a landscape-led, nature-first approach, creating a mosaic of landscape spaces that link water, woodland and grassland across the development and out into the wider landscape. Key Phase 3 includes an approximately 2 kilometre long runway park running east to west and will continue through future key phases to the east of the site. The park connects a number of the green spaces together, including the central park, which is the larger area you see in that area, the sports hub to the north for the secondary school, and the informal greenways which permeate towards the northern boundary. The code also identifies pocket parks spread across Key Phase 3, so these are the green blobs within the residential parcels. These range in size from 100 to 500 square metres, depending on their location and proximity to other key green spaces. So the Runway Park itself will perform a number of functions, including acting as a landscape movement corridor for non-motorised users, an ecological corridor, and provide a key element of the SUDS infrastructure and public open space. The top image we have here is a composite of the different sections of Runway Park, and the code sets out how the park will evolve along its length to provide different types of open space. The centre of Runway Park opens out into a more expansive section called Runway Meadows, which includes extensive wetlands, opportunities for habitat creation, sports pitches, 2 locally equipped areas of play, and a large central area of allotments. The centre line of the former runway forms a strong feature throughout the length of the park, and various nodes, so these are identified by the red asterisks on that top plan, are proposed at key intersections and provides opportunities for landscape features and references to the historic use of the site. The bottom image shows a few of the sections through the informal greenways that extend northwards between the residential parcels. These vary in width and form key public spaces, providing pedestrian and cycle connectivity across the development and include opportunities for social interaction, play and SUDS infrastructure. Chapter 5 of the code sets out the site-wide approach to movement across all modes. A hierarchy of street types are proposed from the main primary street, which is in red, and the village street in orange, to the much smaller residential street types and home zones, which are the ones in the grey and the green. The code includes tables that set out the design details and technical requirements for each street type and accompanying street section drawings that illustrate the form of the street. So the image on the left shows the primary street. This forms the main distributor route through Key Phase 3 and is broken up into 9 different street types based on the location and adjacent uses. The images highlighted green corresponds with primary street type 4 on the plan and shows how this street type changes character at the intersection with the green corridors and introduces a central splitter island to create a landscape feature and pedestrian cycle crossing over the street. The image highlighted purple corresponds with primary street type 5 and shows how plots would be accessed from separate private drives that run parallel with the primary street. The code identifies 10 different frontage characters, which refers to the relationship between the fronts of dwellings and the adjacent street or open space. These have been developed according to their location, and the image on the left shows how these have been grouped into 3 categories based on their formality. A summary of each of these character areas is included on page 20 of your report packs. But as an example, we have, I should mention each frontage character includes a double-page spread of mandatory design guidelines and illustrations, which defines the position and spacing between buildings, edge landscaping, plot components, including the building typology, parking arrangement, and frontage boundary treatments, the building setback, and materials. In this example, the inner primary street has a formal appearance, reflecting the higher density planned for this part of the site. Units will be predominantly terraced or semi-detached with a consistent setback and spacing, creating a near continuous formal building line and with a limited range of typologies used to create a sense of rhythm. Units will be accessed from private drives arranged parallel with the street, with parking located to the side or to the rear of the building. The code also sets out 5 distinct internal parcel character areas, each defined by its unique contextual setting within the neighbourhood. The look and feel of these areas will be characterised by subtle changes reflected in the density, the building typology, parking arrangements, boundary treatments, building setbacks, materiality, and their different arrangement along the streets. The images on the left are of the Runway Park neighbourhood character area, which will comprise medium density housing, typically characterised by a higher proportion of 2 to 3 storey terraces, semi-detached and linked detached house types, consistent setbacks and more urban parking solutions, including mews parking, streets, parking courts and some on-plot parking. Key Phase 3 includes an extension to the commercial area along the western side of Alconbury Weald and is consistent with the employment typologies established within the Key Phase 1 design code and the design and access statement approved under the outline planning permission. Each employment typology is accompanied by a table that sets out mandatory design requirements, including details of the landscaping, building heights and types, the locations, boundary treatments and parking requirements. The table on the left is from the set in the landscape employment typology, and this corresponds with the area in green on the plan. This provides a framework for larger plot sizes with a greater emphasis on soft landscaping and pavilion form buildings, and would be consistent with the existing development in Key Phase 1, which is the larger buildings to the top of that image. So take you back over to Aaron.
Thanks, Matt. I'm just going to take you through some of the photos of the site now, some of these area views that we've got, and the map in the little corner there hopefully gives you a rough idea of the location where these views are from. So this is a view from the boulevard, which is the entrance into the site, just looking across Key Phase 1. So Key Phase 3 is over here in the distance. And then this is a view above Barnwell Road on the west side of Key Phase 1, looking across Key Phase 3 here. As a note, a number of these buildings, in fact, most of these buildings have now been demolished or removed. The site is currently underway in terms of investigations. These are slightly out of date photos. On the left and the bottom here, you can see one of the new listed buildings. And then I'm just going to highlight the peninsula up the top here just as a wayfinder. I'll point that out in a number of these photos for orientation. So this is just north of Key Phase 1 here, looking into Key Phase 3. So the runway at the bottom, you can see some started been broken out. This is where Runway Park would sit, as pointed out earlier. The heritage area is in the top right here. And again, the peninsula and the bomb dump is to the top left there. And so this is the heritage area and a photo over that. So marked generally by the edge of the taxiway here. So we have 4 new listed buildings within this, or 3 new listed buildings within the heritage area. So there are 2 new hangars here and 1 little building just tucked behind this woodland block here, and then 1 new listing just outside, which is this building just on the left here. And then just looking the other way from that last view. So this is looking back over Key Phase 3 here. Again, the peninsula in the distance just there. And then finally, just back to that regulatory plan again. So it is recommended that members delegate approval of the Design Code 2 officers, subject to officer supports for parts B to I of Condition 10, as per the recommendation on page 24 of the reports pack. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for this particular item, we do have the agent here, and he is here to answer any questions if we have any questions. So our agent is Will Riley. I don't know, Will, whether you want to come and join us just in case some of our members have a question for you. Thank you for joining us. So we will move to any questions. Are there any questions that the members have for our agent, for the applicant at all? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that report, which is really, really thorough. I just want to ask a quick question. It's on paragraph 7.17. The 2 strategic green spaces in the 106 agreement as part of the outline permission. I mean, I think I probably know the answer to this, but is the idea that you merging those 2, it just creates a better outcome for local people, for young people particularly, who are going to be using those facilities? What's the logic behind that?
Okay. Aaron, could you put a plan up? Yeah, probably. So you just talk me through the whole of the runway park. So the original outline planning application had them as 2 different strategic open spaces. So you had the campus park, which was this main area here, and then the runway park as it ran through towards the right. As you went through into where the sports hub is and further down, and it will continue into future key phase as well. So the idea of the outline was that there were always going to be a continuous green space, but they were just parceled up because they had slightly different characters at the time. If you remember, the old one had the hub at the left, and there was a different concept for how the spaces were going to be envisaged, which has now evolved. So they were always planned to be a continuous green space through the middle of the site, which you then had the secondary school adding on to as well.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. It might actually not be relevant here, but I will ask the question anyway. So, because there's a large number of green spaces, etc. I know a lot of new developments, it obviously goes to the management committee. How are you envisaging these green spaces? Who do you think they will end up belonging to and having to keep up the cost of keeping these going?
You mean the ones in parcel?
Yeah.
I mean, they're expected to be delivered by the house builders. The intent, the expectation is that they would be managed by the Manco for the site, so Urban and Civic in the first instance, and then at some point in the future, there's going to be a further organisation that's going to have to take charge of them, whether it's Alconbury will, not parish, but that kind of idea that they start to be managed by the people who live there rather than Urban and Civic, and that's the ideal in due course. But at the moment, Urban and Civic would be looking after them.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No? Oh, no other questions. So we'll go on to the discussion. Is there anyone that would like to start the discussion? Oh, yeah, sorry. Questions for clarification first, yeah. Are there any questions or clarifications? Councillor Niche.
I'm probably going to forget it now. No, it's on the 5.5, it was just the county council education. I'm assuming there is no particular issue with the fact that they can't commit to the design code on the schools at the moment. I'm not sure what that actually meant there from a perspective of what can they not commit to, but I'll leave that one. Maybe you can answer some of that for me.
So yes, there's no firm commitment on further details at the moment. The design code is designed to set very high level parameters, particularly around the schools, because they are led by county, and they will have to follow their own design requirements as they can at the time when they're fully designing these.
Are there any other questions of clarification for our planning officer? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm looking at page 47 of 47 on the mixed use areas. Yeah, I've just got a bit of concern really about the parking and the parking availability. Obviously, it says there's shops underneath and flats at the top, and there is an area there where cars are parked. I mean, it just doesn't look big enough. I mean, is there a separate area where shoppers park, or are they all? Is there enough within those areas? Yeah.
So parking standards we've generally looked at based on what's appropriate at the time. We have in the wider requirements for this site detailed travel plans and transport assessments that will look at the level of traffic generation that come out. It's obviously not before members tonight, but the idea will be that it will respond to the requirements of that. Part of the design of the hub will look at what parking numbers are needed both for the residential areas and for the uses that come forward in response to the mixed uses. It's very difficult for us to obviously set exact parking standards at this time because we don't know what actual specific use will come forward. So we'll respond to the uses at the time when we get to the detailed reserve matter stage, but we have done the high level assessments insofar as we can under the transport assessment at this point.
It does look a nice layout and a nice area, but I can't help thinking, there's lots of, we've got them up at Peterborough end where they did look very nice and well controlled at the early days, but now it's mayhem. People park all over the place and it just spoils the whole area. The numbers it's numbers that I'm concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors that have a question for our planners? No, there are no more questions. So we will move on to our discussion. Who would like to start our discussion? Councillor Dew, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been interesting to see these sites come forward over the years, because obviously, having been here right from when this first came forward, we were promised briefs and developments, and we've had a situation where we've worked with lots of developers in the past, and I think a lot of us were quite cynical about how it would develop. And I think, to be fair, that Urban and Civic have come forward with their briefs over the years and have worked with us and our officers to deliver very much what we wanted and hope to see. And I was up there today, and despite my reservations, which are not dissimilar to Councillor Butler's, I have to say, the phase one area is still pretty well looked after and is not abused. And, the traffic problems that we envisaged just aren't there. It seems to be a well managed development. And I'm pleased to see phase three coming forward. And I think once again we've got the opportunity to let our officers pick this up on delegation and run with it. And this is a really good starting point. So I'm pleased to see it. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I agree with Councillor Dew there. It's sometimes these things take a long time to come to fruition, but actually this seems to be coming quickly in some ways than maybe some envisaged, which is good. It's being built out well, and as a testament, I think, to both the urban design and urban civic, I should say, and also the officers who have been kept quite on top of this, I think, and fairly busy, I suppose, making sure that it's. So again, I agree with Councillor Dew. I think the design, I think, is good. meets, approve the design code that it's going forward through. And I think the controls are there that I'm quite happy to make a proposal on this one if that's what you want yet, but I'm happy to wait if you want to wait for other people to speak.
We'll let others speak first, but thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, I'm very impressed with this. I live quite close to the area. Councillor Dew said the first phase, I think, has worked extremely well. And it's good to see that we've progressed. A very thorough report by Lewis and colleagues, so well done. And if Councillor Niche has proposed, then I'm happy to second approval. Thank you.
Councillor Wakeford.
Don't propose to repeat what colleagues have said, though I can concur, and really delighted with the hard work of officers on this. Wanted to relay our thanks. That will obviously need to continue with the delegated authority, but you no longer need a seconder. But I'll be pleased to support this in due course.
Thank you very much. Councillor McAdams.
Yeah, I've been walking around there a lot and visited the area a lot. I mean, it is my ward anyway, so you'd expect that. But talking to people up there, they're very impressed with it, with the standard of housing. They seem to really love it, living there. Going around, it's spacious. It's got a lot of green areas. It's got a kind of a feel-good factor about it, and I'm impressed with the plans we saw tonight, the way that's going, and I just hope, it can just keep going that way. I think this is a very, very good development. I'm pleased with it, and I'm happy to vote in favour tonight. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to contribute before we go on to the vote? Okay, we'll move on to the vote. We've had it approved, but nominated by Councillor Niche for approval, and then we've got Councillor Sanderson seconding that approval. So this approval is for delegated powers to approve, subject to resolution to any outstanding consultee comments and subject to officer support on parts B to I of condition 10. So all those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Anyone against? And any abstentions? Thank you. So that has been approved. So we'll just let our planning officers get themselves ready for the next item. Okay, so we'll move on to item 3B on our agenda, which is a planning application in Fen Stanton, and there's a variation on condition 2, and this will be presented to us by our planning officer, Lewis Tomlinson.
Thank you, Chair. So the site is the old Findus and Sons, St Ives Limited, Low Road, Fen Stanton, and this is a variation of condition 2 approved plans of 20/00285/FUL to include electrical substation with Grasscrete access. So that's the site location plan in front of you, just showing where the site is. This is our constraints map. So you can see the conservation area up to the right and kind of going along the red main road. And you can see listed buildings dotted in pink. And you can see the site outlined in black shading. This is a site plan, so you can see the substation is just on the right-hand side at the top, the square. I'll just get the mouse. Just here. bit sensitive. And so, yeah, so the original permission, grant plan permission for demolition of the existing structures and proposed erection of 94 dwellings, associated walks, including a pedestrian boardwalk. Pre-commencement conditions have been discharged and development has commenced. So as outlined, this section 73 is simply for the inclusion of an electrical substation, and that's located in the eastern corner of the site. That's the elevations of the substation. And this is just a more detailed site plan showing the landscape and proposals. So this application is in front of you tonight as the case officer's recommendation of approval is contrary to that of the Town Council. The Town Council recommended refusal as a statement should be provided to explain why the substation is needed, how the location of substation has been decided and how it impacts on the available flood compensation. Also queries whether electric magnetic field assessment has been completed, have visual impacts for nearest residents been assessed, and have the nearest plots been sold without the future owners seeing the amendment. So just to go through these points, it's in terms of the substation, an assessment's been carried out by the developer and it's deemed necessary for local requirements to have a substation for the development. In terms of its location, there's limited options to where the substation could be sited. It needs to be accessed from the main highway, so not within a parking court. That's obviously for the future maintenance of the substation. It's also been tried to be placed as far away from dwellings as possible, while still having that access for the utility provider. It's placed far enough away from the rear of block B3, so that's the block that you can see nearest to it, for residents to be able to see over the top of it. This is because there is no habitable accommodation at ground floor on B3 due to flood risk. The shared ownership plots within B3 have not been sold, so potential buyers will have the opportunity to view the properties with the substation in place, and they can obviously see that prior to committing to purchase. Importantly, Urban Design have confirmed the support for the location of the substation, so it's been well thought through and discussed with officers. Due to the placing of the substation, the flood compensation area design has been recontoured to ensure adequate capacity. And in regard to electromagnetic field assessment, there is no requirement to submit one, but the agent has advised that the power transformers considered as passive elements in respect to the emission of electromagnetic disturbances. Passive elements are not liable to cause magnetic disturbances, therefore any electromagnetic field produced by the transformer is within the allowable standard limits. The officer recommendation is approval, subject to the conditions outlined in the officer report, amended by the late representations report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We will move on to our speakers for this particular application. We have one speaker. We have Councillor Julie Kerr from St Ives Town Council. Welcome, and you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee.
Thank you for your time. The St Ives Town Council's position is that the proposed substation will be harmful to the local area and views from the low road that were previously identified to be important by officers of the council when negotiating the 94 dwelling development. And it's recommended that the application be refused. Although it's not a large footprint, the proposed substation will project east of the northern block of units. And for the flood defence reasons, it would be raised by 0.8 metres above the surrounding land. Although perversely, if the site was to flood to this level, the entire development would be underwater by about 1.5 metres. As a result of the protrusion, the elevated siting and the close proximity to the low road frontage, the proposed substation would be incongruous, and in paragraph 710 of the officers accept it would be visibly prominent. Reviewing the negotiations for the approved development, I'd like you to draw attention that it was only supported by officers after amendments removing living units on the eastern part of the site. The justification for the revision by the officers was that the reduced that it was to reduce the development footprint, but also to retain the views across the low road to the land to the south, which was identified by the council as being important. Paragraph 710 of the officer's report draws attention to the design guidance that substations should be fully integrated into the design of the new development. Well, it doesn't seem to be the case with this proposal. It will result in a built form creeping into the eastern part of the site, curtailing the important views previously identified by the council, and in effect, it backtracks on one of the principles negotiated by the officers. Within the report at paragraph 5.9, there is a reference to the urban design officer questioning the location of the substation at paragraph 5.1, and it's clarified the agent has stated it's the best location available. Unfortunately, we have not been privy to see alternative options that were considered. However, the need for the substation must have been clear when the site work started. And it's really disappointing that the developer did not revisit the design at that stage. Instead, the developer has pushed ahead, built out the scheme, and in effect now has presented to the council what feels like a fait accompli. Local people in the area have raised questions how this development in flood zone 3 got approval in the first place. And it has a significant impact already on the views. And against that background, the application should be asked to be found an alternative solution and that a permanent future harm due to the permanent future harm of the area. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? Councillor Niche, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Evening. One is just from a potential ignorance perspective. Is it in St Ives or Fenstanton Parish Council? Because you mentioned town, I think. I thought it was Fenstanton.
It is Fenstanton,
Okay,
but we
that's fine.
see these developments come to town because it's
I
close
realise
to
that.
us.
On the second one, it's just a question of flooding, which I'll ask you, but it will go to officers as well. Is obviously he's talked about the fact it's been raised and the fact that the rest of the buildings are raised. Does that alleviate your concerns? Because obviously the view is from those buildings on that side, from their view going outwards, and that what they're suggesting is that the height of the buildings, because obviously they've got underground car parks, haven't they? Well, not underground, below in the flood zone area, shall we say. So therefore the buildings are raised, so the property is raised, and their view seems to be cleared, should we say, from the perspective of the officers. So I just wondered if you'd looked at that as well.
The concern was that they've built it on an area which the officers had already said should not be built on. And that's our concern. It is an eyesore because it's very prominent and very obvious from the low road.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? No more questions. So thank you for joining us this evening. So we will move on to questions of clarification for our planning officer. Councillor Dew.
That's working. Thank you very much. Environment Agency had originally objected to this. Am I right in presuming they've withdrawn that objection now?
So for you, Chair, yes, that's correct. So it's on the late reps report. So the EA objected because there were trees proposed within kind of the flood defence area, which is where the bund is. Since then, there's been an amended landscaping plan, which was on the screen tonight. They removed the trees from there. So in terms of EA, it was more about the planting within that area. But just while I've got the mic and probably maybe jumping ahead here, Lead Local Flood Authority have been consulted. They consider there's no flood implications for the substation. So in terms of flooding across the site, there's obviously other legislation in place around the use of the substation itself. In planning terms, what we're looking at is obviously the siting of it. So that's kind of the visual impact as such. Any flood implications, which we've got consultee responses back, and then landscaping and stuff around and access to it. But there is other legislation that covers kind of the operation of the substation. So just got to be mindful of what we're looking at here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if we could hear a little bit more about why this is required and why it's in the location that we see before us this evening. I think that's been the main objection from Fenstanton Parish Council, hasn't it? If we could just get clarification, that would be handy.
So again, yeah, through you, Chair. In terms of why a substation is required, it's not really a planning issue. So obviously hear the comments from the Town Council, and as officers, like the previous you can see, originally we tried to protect the area for landscaping. Obviously we have to react as things have moved on. The developers have come forward. They said they now need a substation. In terms of the site, and this is the only possible location, it needs to have access to it. And as you've heard, the site has already commenced. So it gives kind of limited opportunity. So it's not an ideal situation, which is reflected in the report. But on balance, this is kind of the least impact in terms of siting for it. So yeah, it's take it at face value. You've been told that the local requirements need a substation for the development. As officers, we need to accept that.
Thank you. Councillor Tivelin?
Thank you. Just following on from that, has the applicant looked at whether there's an alternative if this was not approved tonight? And also in terms of the concerns around the visual impact and everything, is there anything that we as a committee can sort of condition to ensure that the visual impact is minimised? Thank you.
So in terms of what you're seeing tonight, this is kind of the best solution. So the applicant has explored it, but there's a number of requirements such as it needs to have access, it can't be through a parking court. That's simply because utilities require 24/7 access to it. In terms of trying to soften the appearance, so the applicant did propose a number of ways. They tried to explore a green roof, they tried to do further planting, but as always, utility providers want to limit kind of that. They've got their very set, this is what the substation needs to be for their maintenance. The applicant tried to put additional planting in, which has had to be removed because it was within the floods area from the EA. So I think the applicant has done a number of steps to try minimise the impact, but this is kind of the best solution we've got in front of you tonight. And kind of as you heard, officers have questioned the location. It's not that we've just taken on face value, but yeah, this is kind of the solution we've got tonight. I think we're just constrained by the fact that this has come very late in the process and not been then designed to be integrated into the development.
Councillor Tivelin?
Thank you. Can I just come back to you on that? Has there been any assessment of any potential sort of noise intrusion from this stage? It's gone off. Any environmental health concern that is raised by officers? Thank you.
So in terms of noise, it'll be limited anyway, being a substation. So they are kind of compatible with residential developments. That being said, the environmental health team have been consulted and raised no issues with it. It's also to note that the habitable rooms or the habitable accommodation is first floor and above. So kind of any ground floor, there are no ground floor habitable units due to the flood and parking kind of situation. So all those kind of amenity bits are on the ground floor. And obviously where you've got the, I guess the vents, they're kind of on the side. So noise is kind of issued straight out, not up. But again, environmental health have not raised any concerns with it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions of clarification for the planning officer? There's no other questions, so we'll move on to the discussion. Who would like to start the discussion for me? Councillor G.
Go on, I'll dive in again. I'm not been over satisfied with this site from the beginning, but I think we are where we are to a degree, and the officers have brought it to us tonight. And we have to remember the developer who's on here now is not the original developer who brought this site forward, and it has changed significantly since. I'm not happy with the idea that, we come along afterwards of a substation, because presumably they should have known they needed one, but that doesn't alter the fact that it's not within our remit to decide whether they do or not. And we're somewhat limited there. If the thing is that they do, they do. So what we're dealing with, has been mentioned, is the planning aspects of it. As the site's been materially approved anyway, and as most of it's been built out now effectively, or at least the footings are in, we are limited on where we can go with this. And bearing into mind what the utility companies want. So if you look at a lot of the older estates, they used to bury these in, garages next door to someone else's house and all sorts of things. Nowadays, they just won't put up with it. They want access from the main road. They want it clear and so on. So I think, as much as I object to it, I think we're slightly stymied by it. But I'll listen to what the rest of my colleagues have got to say. But I think this is one of these ones where I can't think of a better option. Not that it's my job to, but the part of the thing is, if you're going to object and say no, that you've got to feel that there is one. And I think knowing the site quite well, I think it's quite constrained beyond it. But I'll leave it there for now and see what other members come up with. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Niche.
Didn't realise I was so early. Thank you very much, Chair. No, I'm along with Councillor Gill on this one. I mean, those that have been on this committee for a little while know the complications of this site. Was it ever going to take place? And when it has the difficulty, should we say, with the site. And I agree. I don't think it's been ideal. And it's gone through a long, laborious thing. And I know a lot of the locals, have their different views on it, should we say, and call it different things. But it's moving forward. It's got outline. It's got planning permission. It's in place. I think the difficulty is that I think by the sounds of it, the developer has tried to put some mitigation on visibility with it, which is a real shame because I think they could have hidden it quite nicely. But it sounds like people like the Environment Agency have turned around and said, no, you can't do that. Or maybe they ought to get their act a little bit in some of the areas where they've got lots of trees and they ought to deal with it. But that's not for us to discuss. I think from the perspective of the views that are out there, as has been already said, the actual properties are above, so they're going to look over it. Still not ideal, but better than it would be as if they were lower, I suppose. So on all things and putting all these things in there and on the balance of it, I'd actually probably say no, but I actually will have to say yes, because I don't think there's any real material reasons why we couldn't refuse it. Because it's there and it's what is required by the utilities. I can't see an alternative. And again, like Councillor Jew, it's not for us to find alternatives, it's what's in front of us. And what's in front of us is probably not ideal, but it's probably the best of a bad bunch. So I'm happy at a later stage to propose or second, but I'll leave others to talk first. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to contribute? Councillor Golson.
Thank you, Chair. As both Councillor Dew and Councillor Niche said, I remember this coming a number of times to us, and we really played with this one to try and get it right. That, as we've now said, there is a different developer in there. They've obviously looked at the figures and they recognise they need this. Are we content with it? I'm not. However, I can't think of a reason that would stand up to refuse. And therefore, I think this is something that hard pressed, and we have to accept this one. And for this one, I will propose acceptance at this stage if you accept that.
Thank you. I'll accept that proposal. Is there anyone else that would like to contribute to this discussion? Councillor Wakeford.
I won't repeat what colleagues have said, but I will sufficient to offer to second this, because I agree this isn't an optimal planning outcome where you bodge a key bit of infrastructure in at the end rather than planning it through. But as colleagues have said, we are where we are. The difference of ownership on the site obviously isn't a material planning consideration, but I dare say isn't irrelevant to the local optics and politics as this will be seen by residents to whatever degree that helps. But yes, with a heavy heart, very happy to second it.
Thank you. Councillor Mockball.
Thank you, Chair. I already understand that there is a seconder on here, but I just don't believe that this doesn't have a negative, amenity impact for those properties because, with LP14, is there nothing that we can do? There's not within our remit based on LP14 that we can move that substation to maybe the car park? Just let, from the officer.
I'll bring that to our planning officer.
So, in terms of LP14, I guess the question would be, what amenity impact is there?
Visual amenity. I know it's on below the eye line, but it's still, you can still see it.
Okay, so it's probably not LP14. It's probably more LP11, LP12, which is kind of more our design, the kind of the visual impact as such. LP14 is more like overlooking, kind of that loss of privacy, overbearing. This would kind of be more of a visual impact. I think the simple answer is that it can't be in the parking courts because of the 24/7 utility requirements. And in terms of its location, like we said, it's on balance. It's not in a perfect location, we accept that. But in terms of the development as it stands, there isn't another kind of logical place for it to go. It will be set against an existing building. There is some trees proposed around it. Granted, they did try to do more, but the EAF said no. So you have kind of got that balance, and there's no habitable rooms at ground floor. So yeah, I think in terms of, if you're looking for policies, I'd say it's LP11, LP12, not an LP14. But just because you can see something, is it harmful? So I think it's just members need to be clear on what the harm would be in the context.
Thank you very much. So is there anyone that wishes to contribute? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. So on page 73 of our agenda pack, the front elevation in context is quite illuminating. So although, as has been mentioned previously, that it is the residential, the livable spaces are on the first floor, it will have a significant, like the top of the roof is in line with the balustrade. So it is going to have, I think, a detrimental impact. I guess the way I'm framing this is, if this came forward as part of the original design, and for whatever reason, this was the only place it could have been offered to have this substation, would we approve it? And I think overall, you know, the prospect of not having the power. I mean, it's odd that the 94, I think, dwellings wouldn't need a substation, but as I say, as others have said, we are where we are. So I'll be voting in favour, similar to others, with a heavy heart. That it's frustrating that we're being presented it in this way, but I think clearly the properties will need electricity, and we need to ensure that the overall harm of not having this will be greater than the harm of including it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I'm no electrical engineer, but I'm totally surprised that they've allowed a multi-voltage substation to be anywhere near floodwater. I mean, I've seen this site flooded at least 20 or 30 times in my time. However, I hear what my colleague says, and I suspect I'll vote with them, but I'm terribly surprised that they allow electricity to be so close to water. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if our planning officer, whether you want to just to mention what we've been advised about that with flooding water.
Yeah, sure. So through you, Chair, there's other obviously legislation that covers kind of the function of that as an electrical substation. In terms of the substation itself and any implications on flooding, Lead Local Flood Authority have said it's acceptable, EA have said it's acceptable. As officers, they're the technical consultees advising us on flood risk, so we take that on face value. Yeah, I think that this site is heavily constrained, as we know, and I think it's this kind of retrospective nature of it coming about towards the end of the build out that has caused these issues. But in terms of it's a Section 73 for a substation, we can't go back and redesign the whole scheme on this basis. So I think just the advice from officers to members would be it's proportionate kind of response to this, the harm. And if you've been presented with an option, it's weighing it up. Is this your only option? It's non-balanced decision. I think that's made clear in the officer report.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else before we move on to our vote? No, we'll move on to our vote. So Councillor Goulson has recommended approval, and Councillor Wakeford has seconded that approval. All those that are in favour of approval, please raise your hands.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And those that are against?
1, 2, 3,
And any abstentions?
1.
So that has been approved. That's all right. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Dew, and Merry Christmas. We will move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is our appeal decisions, and our planning service manager will report back to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the first appeal, which was the Warboys one, that was actually the one that came to committee. And members went with the officer recommendation to refuse. It was an unbalanced one by officers again. It was a post office situation in terms of how officers' interpretation of policy LP22 was that marketing was required because it was a loss of a commercial unit. The inspector has looked at LP22 in a different light and said that actually they read the policy that it's either a lack of community support or marketing, so you don't have to do both. So they were content that the parish council supported it. There was no objections against the loss of it, so that therefore demonstrated that there was a lack of community support. I think kind of from officers, there's a similar appeal going on in Brampton, which was another one that came to committee for the old post office. So we'll wait to see the outcome of that. And I think then we'll reassess kind of LP22 in these kind of contexts. But sometimes it's not just one appeal decision which changes how we look at a policy. So yeah, I think just watch the space. We'll advise members kind of at a later date. And I'll just bring Erin in for the next one.
Thank you. The next one was the Haddon Solar Farm that members might remember came to back in December last year, I think. So this was actually a committee application. It was overturned. Officers recommended approval for it. Members put out 4 reasons for refusal on loss of agricultural land, on landscape impact, the impact on safe flying from Sibson Airfield and surrounding field of a local residents flying, and the impact on neighbour amenity. So the inspector didn't uphold it on loss of agricultural land or residential amenity, but did dismiss the appeal on landscape impact and safe flying from the airfields. Of particular note, so during the course of the appeal, we had comments from the Pilots Association at Sibson Airfield. So they weighed in, which we didn't have before us at the time of the application when we were looking into it, and the inspector dismissed it on lack of information in relation to that, and on landscape harm. It was a different conclusion. Ultimately, the inspector did make some specific comments around where he felt the harm was coming from, which had some agreed, some difference of opinion, but it is probably worth reading the conclusions in that appeal decision. It is very clear that it was dismissed on the whole of the impact, not necessarily just one point or the other. So how that would have stacked up if it was a different outcome, we don't have that information before us. We'll watch that space.
So then the third one, which is for 2 dwellings. So the inspector gave weight to the fact that the site had an extant planning permission for 1 dwelling, and also came to the conclusion that the site is physically and visually related to the built up area. The design was acceptable, so that one was allowed. That was a delegated refusal. Then the 4th one, which is Fen Stanton. So that was a retrospective permission for a storage container in the rear car park area. The inspector concluded that the container is visible from the public realm, viewed in the context of houses behind it, so was dismissed on grounds of significant harm to the character and appearance of the area. And then the last one was a public inquiry I did about 2 months ago, or maybe a month ago, time's flying. But this was a non-determination. Officers were working with the applicant to kind of resolve design issues, viability. They appealed against non-determination. By the time we actually got to the public inquiry, officers were supporting the proposal. So therefore, we're recommending that the appeal was allowed and planning permission was granted. And the inspector agreed and was, so the appeal was allowed and planning permission was granted for that. So that's 57 apartments, 16 cottages, retirement living. and on Cambridge Street in St Neots. I think that's it, Chair.
Thank you very much. So that takes us to the, Councillor Niche, have you got a question for?
I don't want to hold anyone up too long. Just briefly, just for the record, I suppose, does that first one, which says delegated, ought to be amended to show that it went to DMC first? No, the one above. The Warble. Yeah. Oh, both. Sorry, you're right. The solar park one as well said delegated, doesn't it? Correct. Yeah. And lastly, just on the last one, on the St Neots one, obviously that was going to be delegated. You say wasn't going to go to DMC anyway, and I just wondered from my own mind, because I didn't read through it because I hadn't seen it. What was the town's position on that one? Because that seemed a little bit of a concerning one to start with until you said that you were looking for proposal acceptance anyway.
So St Neots Town Council actually supported that. So it would have been delegated if we got round to it. I think the concerns were that at the point of non-determination, there was objections in from conservation, urban design, lead local flood, it goes on. There was many unresolved issues. So I think if we'd been made to make a decision at that point, it may have come to committee on a recommendation of refusal. It's just that as we went through the process of the appeal, outstanding issues were resolved, and we got to the point as officers that on the plan and balance, it was acceptable. But yeah, so in the end, yeah, delegated decision in line with Town Council recommendation.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to really thank members for really supporting me on the Haddon, myself and Kevin on the Haddon application. We were quite surprised, I must admit, that the appeal got dismissed. It was a lot of hard work to actually formulate all the documentation. I thank Aaron for assisting me. One thing that has come out of this, which we probably need to look at, many years ago, Doug will remember, and probably John as well, that whenever a member took an item to appeal, it was always assisted by the officer. Right? Now, this is not done now. So Aaron did assist me, you know, and helped me greatly. But in the peer review, myself and Kevin, sat in and on the peer review, and they asked us who wrote this appeal up, and I said, well, we did as members, and they were astounded. They'd never ever known anything like that happened before. I say this as, well, there is a member of public, but it doesn't make any difference. But it's just something to just think on, I think, whether we need to look further into it.
I'm aware that we're still live streaming because we haven't finished the meeting. That's okay. So I'll just end the meeting if that's okay. Okay, yeah. So Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. Just to pick that up briefly, I guess that is picking up matters that are the responsibility of a different bit of this council at a different place. I see the executive member for planning across from